Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. In this video, and the subsequent video, so part 1 and part 2, we're going to look more at some of the Shinto teachings found within the Jingunden systems. We will be focusing specifically on material used in the Tachibana Jingunden. Those will be our main examples. The reason for this is in the more Buddhist versions of the tradition, such as the Tada Genji tradition, the Kusunoki tradition, the Shotoku Jingunden, that information and teachings are more in regards to Buddhism. They have teachings of body mandalas, but which is going to be one of the focuses here is deities of the body. The idea that one's body is a geography of divinity. But in those systems like Tada, Genji, Kusunoki, and Shotoku, those traditions are specifically, they are majoritarily Buddhist. Of course, there's Buddhist Shinto mix, but they are predominantly Buddhist. So for the purpose of these videos, we're actually going to look at like I said, we're going to use the Tachibana Jingunden because it is predominantly Shinto more than Buddhism. Like I said, the Shinto aspect is far less complicated and developed when we're talking about like body mandala or things like that. It's less complicated and less developed because there isn't a lot of direct teaching about body mandala. However, as you'll see, there is absolutely a deep it's a deep it's very much under the surface of a lot of the teachings, this idea of divinities of the body, divinities in the land, the non-dualism of the divinity of the outside and the inside. So while they don't necessarily have specific teachings calling it out, in detail about body mandala, so as in Buddhism, you see more specific language about body mandala, and in Shinto, less language about body mandala. You'll still see that a lot of this material is there. And again, since Buddhism and Shinto are very interconnected in the pre-Meiji world, it seems like making this distinction almost seems to not be needed. But again, since the Tachibana Jingunden takes a stance which is very Shinto, we do have some good reasons to make these distinctions. Also, need to point out that even in olden times, pre-Meiji, you do see some Shinto systems, such as Issei Shinto, being very much being less mixed with Buddhism. That is, some of these Shinto traditions, again, pre-Meiji, were very much about putting Shinto first or putting Shinto before Buddhism. And in some cases, not really including Buddhism much at all. Again, the Issei Shinto is sort of known as being one of those systems that doesn't include Buddhism much. It puts Shinto first, whereas generally Buddhism sort of is the dominant and Shinto is the secondary. You do find a couple of Shinto traditions where Shinto is first and Buddhism is either second or not very or not much at all. So because of these factors, right, because Tachibana Jingunden is very, very much more Shinto, and because you do have some Shinto traditions which are predominantly Shinto and Buddhism comes in a very far second, it is worth the time to stop and actually look at it. So on your screen there's a very famous, very utilized picture of Izanami and Izanagi. So these are the first deities. These are the creation deities of Japan, sort of like first man, first woman. And they are the origin point of the divinity of Japan. So all the deities ultimately come from these two, the court nobles, the samurai, all of these things. Without these two creating the islands of Japan and having their kids, etc., none of this Shinto happens. So these are the origin deities. Now they are not the first deities. I need to be very clear. They are not the origin of all of the Shinto gods. They're not the origin of the heavens, but they are the origin point for Japan. So again, there are deities that precede them, but they are the main deities that are the starting point for Japan. The creation stories of Japan vary in detail based on what lineage or tradition. So some of them they don't. There's different sort of origin stories that don't that share similar details, but all of them are slightly different from each other. Some are very different from each other. But they all agree that these two deities, Izanami and Izanagi, are the yin and yang which creates the vibrant life of Japan. Equally, their story does end with Izanami's death and her descent into Yomi, which is basically the Shinto version of the land of the dead. Now, it's also known as Ne no Kuni, which is the Kuni means land or province, and Ne is means tree roots, or the roots of a tree, or the roots of a flower, the roots of a plant. But it can also mean origin. So the land, the province of the origin, or the province of the roots, or the country, or the place of the roots. So that's Yomi, and which is basically like the Shinto land of the dead. But when she dies and descends into Yomi, this introduces the life-death dualism into Shinto. So from these two, basically all of the yin and yang dualism, life, death, male, female, all of these things come from their creation of Japan. So if you look at this diagram on your screen, that comes from the Tachibana Jingunden, and that is a human figure that has the head, the neck, shoulder area with the two arms, and then the sort of the central chest, stomach area, then the genitals, and then the right and the left foot. So this is actually a description of, this is where we start to see some Shinto aspect of body mandala. So this is first and foremost, one of the best examples comes from this. So the idea of various deities being born from other deities, and we see the idea that gods produce gods from their own bodies. Not, in some instances the gods are produced through sexual union, but in many instances they are, miraculously manifested out of the body of a god. And so this idea of deities just emerging from other deities is sort of also in line with this idea of the body mandala. But here on this diagram, this specifically, we find this is when Izanami, which is the female deity, so the female creation deity. So now she has died, and she has gone to Yomi, the land of the dead. Now, when she's there, her body takes on different deities. She's no longer producing deities like in the land of the living or in the land of Japan. Her body is now filled with the 8 lightning gods. And these 8 lightning gods are specifically deities of Yomi, deities of the land of the dead. So when Izanagi goes down into Yomi to try to find Izanami, when he finds her, he sees her, and when he sees her, she again, she no longer has the vibrant life aspects. Her deities are no longer like the deities of the living world. She now has, her body is now manifesting these 8 lightning gods. And so in so many ways, now that she was dead and she's part of Yomi, she had become a goddess of Yomi, and her body mandala now reflects the reality of Yomi, or the reality of being dead. So now her body is filled with with all of these lightning gods of Yomi. She cannot return to the land of the living. She no longer, the reality is, the paradigm has changed. She's no longer producing gods of the living side of the coin. She's now got gods of the death side of the coin. So her body mandala is literally different now that she's a goddess of Yomi. Now there are now following this, Izanagi has to escape from Yomi, and this is where there's kind of two main different versions. In one version, Izanagi, upon escaping Yomi, he's still a god of the living, and so he has to clean himself, he has to purify himself of the energies of Yomi. And in one version of the story, it's when he's purifying himself from these energies of Yomi, which would be the shade, the dead, that side of the dualism. Then from his body, he manifests the sun goddess Amaterasu, and then her brother Susanoo and her other brother Tsukuyomi. Basically, the Amaterasu goddess of the sun, Tsukuyomi god of the moon, and Susanoo is basically like the god of the storms and god of the ocean, give or take. Um, However, that's one version. So that version is really emphasizing that Izanami is now producing lightning gods in Yomi, and he's still in the land of the living, and he's producing gods. Now that's again one version of the story. There's another now, but I do need to say that there's another version of the story that says that Amaterasu, Susanoo, and Tsukuyomi were actually born from Izanagi and Izanami prior to her death and her descent into Yomi. In that version of the story, Susanoo still cleanses himself from the energies of Yomi, but he does not spontaneously produce more deities, but it's different deities. So regardless of which deities are produced, his cleansing himself of the energies of Yomi and then producing more deities of the living of Japan is again the dualism of when you're alive, it's one reality, you're producing these vibrant living deities, and then she is now dead and she's producing, her body is now generating deities of the dead. So we can be fairly certain that the body mandala specific teaching is Buddhist in origin. But because basically Buddhism and Confucianism absolutely influenced the early sort of formal Shinto's formation. So from 680 to 900 AD, when Shinto is like turning into more of a religion as opposed to, rather than just a series of stories and traditions and sort of indigenous beliefs, it becomes more of a state religion, becomes more codified, becomes formed into like an actual religion. It's absolutely being influenced by Buddhism and Confucianism and Chinese influence by that point. There's no debating that. That's done. That's, everyone knows this. But even with that having been said, the body mandala teachings specifically are still more of a Buddhist teaching and less of a Shinto teaching. Even though we do see these aspects in Shinto, it's still really a Buddhist teaching. But whereas, like I said, in Buddhism, the body mandala is reflective of the six realms and the enlightened qualities with different sort of enlightened deities in people in your body. The Shinto body mandala is reflective of the same aspects of Shinto, but focuses more on the immediate life and death and nature, the dualism between purity and impurity, and the dualism between life and death. So meaning that in the Buddhist body mandala, it doesn't matter if you're alive or dead or in between lives or reincarnating, your body mandala, your mind, the mandala of your mind and body is got the same deities, right? But in Shinto, the deities do change based on whether it's yin or yang, or whether you're alive or whether you're dead. For example, Izanagi is still producing living gods, and Izanami now in Yomi is producing the 8 lightning gods. Let's back up just for a second and look at another sort of Shinto body mandala aspect, and that is Japan itself. So remember, the very islands of Japan are born from Izanami and Izanagi. That is, each island is the body of a god, right? So it's actually kind of a reversal of the pattern. Rather than being gods inside the body, this shows that the gods are the body, or rather the body of the gods are the world. So rather than the body mandala being sort of a mandala within each person, even this aspect actually extends it outwards. It says Japan itself is the divine geography. So the key factor for a samurai of this tradition is that the divinity, like I said, is infused into everywhere, everything everywhere. The landscape is a deity's body, and their own body, the samurai's own body, is also filled with divinity. The environment is made up of gods. Their own body is made up, the samurai's body is made up of gods. So the principle here is that Japan is a divine country. The islands are gods. The people living here, the samurai, are descended from gods, right? It is ruled by the emperor, who is a descendant of the sun goddess. So the it goes on and on and on, so many examples. And so in keeping with those examples, we will close out with another story that shows that when Tsukuyomi killed a goddess named Ukemochi no Kami, and as she died, her body gave rise to most of the main crops, such as rice from her belly, millet from her head, etc., etc., etc. So we have the body. So in this particular case, even the crops that are grown, right? So the islands are deities, the gods are deities, the human beings are descended from deities, like the samurai are all, all the great clans are descended from, the Fujiwara are descended from Aminoko Yane, for example, and the Genji are a branch of the imperial house, which is ultimately descended from the sun goddess, etc., etc. But even the food, right? Even the crops, the rice, the millet, the wheat, that is also believed to have sort of sprung from the body of a deity. So the landscape is divinity. The country is divine, right? And to close out, we'll just say that it was at the time of these crops appearing. So this, when this deity died and these crops appeared, this is actually when Izanagi, sort of creator male deity, realized that Japan was essentially finished in its creation. And this is when he returned to the heavenly realms.